everyone, my name is Mickey, a member of OASA. It's my honor to interview Dr. Wu earlier at the OASA TTT conference. Dr. Wu has fruitful experience as a venture capitalist and entrepreneurship in the Greater China and Silicon Valley. He also actively shapes the future as an advisor at Skydeck, the incubator program at UC Berkeley. As a co-founder and senior partner at Future Lab Consulting, he navigates the forefront of technology, specializing in blockchain and artificial intelligence. Without further ado, let's move to the interview video.
Good morning, Professor Wu. Thank you for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here. To begin with, to let our audience to better know more about you, can you tell the audience and also our OASA member a little background of yourself?
Thank you very much for inviting me for this interview. I'm very grateful to Greg Lee and OASA for inviting me to participate in this event. Because I taught at HKUST also for several years, I taught entrepreneurship, undergraduate classes, Master of Engineering classes, as well as the MBA program. And I only taught courses in entrepreneurship that I personally designed. There are maybe 6 or 7 courses that I created over several years. And that was kind of like the culmination. So we kind of go in reverse order, But when I started out life as positioned to be an academic, I got a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. I worked in the immunodiagnostics industry for a while, not very long, about 3 years, and I became a venture capitalist. And I've done that for a couple of decades, and I've had the privilege of working both here in Asia, overseeing funds that invested in Taiwan and Southeast Asia, as well as in Silicon Valley. And so I invested in all kinds of technology. And one of the things that every venture capital firm is looking for is new opportunities. Now, the question, of course, is how do you define that? And we'll talk about that. That's what this whole event is about. But I think what I'd like to emphasize is that from a very early age, I had a love of technology, a fascination. Of course, a fascination with space, because I grew up in that era, not just like the other speakers talking about Star Trek but even long before that, space exploration has been a favorite topic of science fiction writers for a very, very long time. And one of the things I really enjoyed about that was that they dealt with a lot of our human societal problems that we are familiar with, and they put them in an unfamiliar context. You have some alien that behaves somehow differently or somehow. Anyway, the idea is to see the world, see opportunities, see ourselves from a different lens. Yeah. And that's going to be really what I'm going to be talking about at this conference in the afternoon, which is to see see space and this new space or space technologies, not so much as the final product, such as our esteemed taikonaut was talking about, but more seeing that as a lens, as a mental lens to look at how our lives are today. And so it's kind of similar to the science fiction writing idea, but I think that helps bring people first of all, more down to earth to think about what we can do now, today, for ourselves, for our communities, but also it makes it somehow more real. It's not, I can't even imagine what it's like to live on the moon or Mars, and it seems too far away, not just in the physical distance, but mentally. How can I even think about that? I don't know anything about that. So, one of the things from all my experience with entrepreneurs, and I've been working in the startup ecosystem all my life, so more than 40 years at this point, what everyone is really trying to do is, as Greg Lee pointed out, ask better questions, and that's what I always taught. And that's something that I learned, going back into my chronology here, that's what I learned as a venture capitalist, because venture capitalists get to meet thousands of entrepreneurs, sometimes even in 1 year, and we don't actually have time to understand what they do. What we try to do is ask the right questions so I know how much time I want to spend with them. Just as I mentioned with you with this interview, I need to know how much time so I know how to manage this interaction so it meets your expectations, and I know what I can offer. So I think what's important, again, in my life is looking at certain themes and also certain mindset. And of course, these are things that I had to develop. I was not born, like they call, a god out of the sea and I had everything. Of course not. I had to learn a great many things, and I started off with a great many wrong ideas or incomplete ideas. And I had to learn. And so one of the most valuable things that I share with my students in entrepreneurship is that the most valuable learnings, two things. One is through direct experience, by doing, by living. And that's why I said, you need to bring space down to earth in order to live that, to experience that. And the other is that you have to continue to ask questions, because that's how you learn. And you learn when you ask questions and when other people ask you questions. And so anyway, so venture capital, kind of helped shape me. I think each phase of my life and the different things I was given the opportunity to do helped, refine my direction. I didn't have a single path. One of the other speakers was talking about the traditional career paths that many Hong Kong families would like for their children, banker, lawyer, doctor, accountant, and so on. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? That's perfectly very good professions, always in need, and so on and so forth. But not everyone is meant to have that path. Each of us really should discover a path of his or her own, one that is more fulfilling in a fundamental way. So, I'm very pleased with PolyU, for example. They have, fashion design. You should give people, not just young girls or young women, but young men who also want to work in the fashion industry, or these new materials, right? Which are things that they will need in space, and some of those come out of the fashion and certainly the textile industry. Okay, so a couple of decades in venture capital, all across different industries. So I have no expertise. I love to tell entrepreneurs, I'm not an expert in anything, and of course for students as well, but I've lived long enough, I've seen enough that I kind of know how to ask the questions. Of course, I'm continuing to learn more and more, but I can grasp the idea of what entrepreneurs are proposing fairly quickly. And whether it's software or, as I mentioned, like fashion or new materials, and I've talked to a number of entrepreneurs who are doing real space things. They talk about the geolocation things. I know it's very popular one is using drones, for example, to look at wildfires and so on. These are really, really useful technologies today, and these are things that will be part of the tool set that we will need as we think about space exploration. So a couple of decades very broadly in venture capital, about a decade on the startup side. And that meant not so much as a founder, not that I had my own idea, but I had friends or other people that I felt I could help them grow their companies. Did that about a decade, and then had a decade of teaching entrepreneurship at the university level, which culminated, after I retired from HKUST, 1 year at UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley, which is where I did my undergraduate study. As an undergraduate student, I studied mathematics and music. So how do you get from mathematics to music to biochemistry and molecular biology, looking at medical technologies and then IT technologies? And so when I started to teach, I felt I had to reinvent myself. I had to reinvent how I tell my story, who I am, what I care about. And So the other theme, we already talked about, one theme is this sort of science and technology, one is this idea of exploration of new things, new ideas. I decided that the way I would want to describe myself, that was actually the way I had behaved in those different occupations, was I'm an investor in human capital. I like to work as a venture capital investor. Of course, I was investing money, not my own money, from a fund. I was investing in teams that were doing startups. I had a very long-term view. It's not a short-term return on investment. You look for a public offering in 5 to 7 years. And so it's really about the people and the team. Can they build this team? Can they do the things that they need to do to motivate themselves, motivate other people to work with them, and so on. So I discovered that this is really it is one of the most fascinating parts of entrepreneurship. And it's not something that's mechanical. You can't just read a book and say, this is how it works. It's not software. You can't say, well, if everyone just did their roles, it would all work out. It doesn't work that way. So it's complicated. It's of course intensely human. It's about communication. It's about the interaction. It's about intuition. It's a very, very big part of all of my work. And somehow this all sort of has come together after like 40 years of work. And for the last 6 years, I've been an advisor at UC Berkeley's accelerator and incubator program called Skydeck. So it is part of the university, but we have alongside it also a seed fund where we actually invest. But we are extraordinarily selective. We are starting a new batch right now. We had 2,000 applications from all over the world, and we are only going to accept about 20 of them. And each of those 20 will receive $200,000 US dollars, of course, to help move them along. And one of the really good metrics of the success of our program is by the time it's over, it's about 6 months, we give them a lot of training, we give them a lot of opportunities to meet different people in the ecosystem. It's very, very important. We heard that from some of the other speakers already. The importance of having a supportive and effective ecosystem is the critical thing, and we'll talk about that later in terms of Hong Kong. So 2 things. One is that when they have a demo day, all the companies do their final presentation, we attract thousands of people to that event, and usually about 600 to 800 are investors. They register as investors. And so that's already a very strong indication that investors are interested in the kinds of companies that we are developing. The other interesting metric is, of course, every startup needs money. Everyone wants to fundraise. And that's correct. It's not a complete story, but the metric I want to emphasize is that on average, all of the companies that go through our program at Skydeck will have roughly 40 interviews with different investors. That's already remarkable, because that is one of the biggest challenges for entrepreneurs, especially young entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs. How do you get an interview with a venture capitalist? How do you get someone to actually sit down and listen to what you want to say? So anyway, we're effective. I don't need to keep giving more of an advertisement, but I'm very excited to be part of Skydeck. I'm only a volunteer, so it's not totally unpaid. But it's very rewarding, to work with young people, to guide them. It's not instructional, it's not like regular school academic learning. It's about, again, asking questions to stimulate their minds to think a little bit more differently, a little bit more clearly from different points of view. We have over 650 advisors, all of whom are from industry, and when they have the chance to talk with these advisors, that's part of what the advisors bring. They bring expertise, they bring connections, contacts into the industry, so we help them with partnerships and customers, but we also show them that the problem is never as simple as you thought it was.
Yeah, it is.
And so I think they come out with a much broader understanding of themselves, and very importantly, of their teams, and of what it means to find an opportunity and create a business on top of that.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, then like moving on, like you just mentioned you have no expertise, but I believe that like listening to your background, you are a expertise in entrepreneurship. Then like what do you think a new wording called like entrepreneurship? Like entrepreneur and also entrepreneurship mixed together, like for the new space economy.
Yeah, in order to communicate effectively, especially with new ideas, this turns out to be a particularly challenging task. And I'm going to answer your question, but I want to give a slight digression, because obviously here in Hong Kong, a lot of people use the Cantonese language or Putonghua, Mandarin. And when you try to translate abstract concepts, and this is what happened to me when I started, again, almost 40 years ago, to translate the idea of what venture capital and entrepreneurship is about into Chinese character is very difficult. It doesn't come out right? The essence of it is wrong, because they focus on the risk side. They call that risk capital. And of course, that was the British system as well. Venture capital was risk capital, not entrepreneurial kind of capital. And entrepreneurship was also considered very, very high risk. It is risky, but it's sometimes, and I'll speak to this as well, for a young person to say, oh, well, I just want to work for some corporation, and I think that's a lower risk way of getting through life. Today, that's no longer true. 30 years ago, maybe it was more true when employees of large companies could work for 20, 30 years and retire. Today, you can't do that. You can't survive that way. You will be very quickly displaced by new talent that comes in. And so actually being in a more entrepreneurial environment, you have to take more responsibility of yourself. You have to be more accountable for your own progress and your own success. That mindset actually helps you grow more. You become more of a leader. You can become someone who is more successful regardless of what the environment is. So again, even in a corporate environment, with this more entrepreneurial attitude, you will actually be more successful than if you just sort of shut down and say, well, I'll only do what people tell me to do. I'll be, a good person, good boy or girl. I'll play within the rules. That is absolutely the riskiest way to look through life. Okay, so in order to interest people in a new area, it's very easy to invent a new term. So what is astropreneur? It's a new term. You're trying to squeeze two things together, saying this astronautics, astro something, and entrepreneurship. And that's fine. It's perfectly okay. Some people would call it clever, some people would call it, whatever. So I don't want to give judgment, and that's how I work with startup entrepreneurs. Judgment doesn't help, because whether I am right or wrong is actually quite irrelevant to their success. But if I can prompt them to think better, to find a better path for themselves, then they grow, right? My judgment will actually make it more difficult for them to grow, whether it's good or bad. So, I think, again, we, especially in the last several years, we are in an attention economy, right? Especially because of social media and media in general. Everybody needs a soundbite, so Entrepreneur is a perfect soundbite. And because it's new and not quite clear, say, oh, that sounds interesting, I want to learn more. So that's a perfectly reasonable way to interpret that. Does it help you understand what it's about? That is, a later part of the story.
Apart from people making soundbite, do you think what can the government do to give it a push for the new space economy? Instead of just creating new wording, what can the Hong Kong government really do to give it a push?
Okay, so I'm glad you took that angle, because of course politicians, especially, because they're very busy doing a lot of different kinds of things. Politicians really need sound bites, right? As a way of communicating with the public, but also communicating with their peers. We obviously have LegCo members here in Hong Kong who have backgrounds, engineers and so on, and professional people and business people. But then there are others who may be less familiar with it, especially with new technology. So it's important to give them something that provides a context. Context is an extremely critical part of communication, because it's what gives meaning, right? And the word entrepreneur is a good example of that, because it's this marriage of astronautics and astronomy and entrepreneurship. So people immediately get a sense of what it is. It could be all wrong, but it doesn't matter. It gives them something to focus on. Now, the problem with government officials all over the world is that, many governments over the last 30, 40 years, ever since I've been doing this, and I've been very involved in attempts here in Asia, in Taiwan, in mainland China, in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia. I'm quite familiar, and of course here in Hong Kong, quite familiar with all of these challenges of encouraging innovation, broadly speaking, technology innovation as a subspecialty, and then technology innovation becoming some kind of entrepreneurial activity. And the problem is that it's not very easy. There isn't, how should I put it? It isn't very clear what the government role should be or can be. Right. Now, the first thing is, of course, it needs to be supportive. If it's not supportive, then nothing is going to happen, right? And so you want to provide an environment that is favorable. Okay, what is favorable? So for example, and this was what happened in the States in the very beginning, but here also in Hong Kong, is you give tax breaks, right, for investment in new technologies or in investment funds and so on. Because money makes the world go round, and if you provide opportunities for people with money to invest at for them at a personal level, lower risk, but in something that is inherently more risky, such as technology innovation, that makes sense. It's a trade-off. So I think, I don't know the details here in Hong Kong, but I'm sure that there are more things that can be done from a purely financial standpoint. Just looking at this balancing act that I just described in terms of how do you align the interests of investors with the needs of entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship. Now, another part, and I know that the Hong Kong government does some of this, of course, with space technologies. Now, grants to researchers. I know Quentin Parker, Professor Parker, has some of these grants, and I'm sure there are other researchers as well. There needs to be, well, I don't know what the amount of such grant activity is, but all of these researchers, particularly academic researchers, can use a lot more. Right? And this is true in America as well. In America, we have a lot of national level grants through the National Institutes of Health for biomedical projects, and often the Department of Defense supplies a lot of grants. So-called SBIR grants come from the Small Business Administration, and all of these have been very long-standing programs that are designed to fund activities which are no longer purely academic, and some of them are still very academic, but they're still mostly academic because there's a lot of uncertainty. There isn't even a concept of what a product might be. And so for an individual investor or an investment fund, there's actually nothing to invest in other than the people. And that's really not the way most investors invest. They understand the fundamental basis of their investment is investing in the people, but they're not just going to say, oh, I like the way this person thinks, I'm going to give them money. And grants, of course, have no equity, right? So they are gifts of money. So this is something that only governments and large organizations can afford to do. Now, when they do that, one of the things that I think we could encourage more in Hong Kong is get more collaboration in such grants, with perhaps some kind of matching of corporate money as well as government money. Now, what that does is very interesting. Number one is it brings the corporates more into this ecosystem, as an active participant, but it also reduces their risk, right? Because they don't put up so much money. And for the government, it's the same thing. They don't have to take as much risk because there's another partner.
So it's a win-win situation.
It is absolutely win-win-win, because the startups now also can benefit from the industrial and market experience of the corporate partners. And this is one of the things that we do at Skydeck as well. We, in addition to the accelerated companies that we personally fund, or our fund invests in, we also have corporate programs where we have sponsors. Some are government sponsors, and some are more corporate sponsors that want to pay. They pay a sum of money to Skydeck so that we will train their startups that are spin-offs from their companies. Now, that's only one way it can work. It doesn't have to be exclusively for the spin-offs, but spin-offs are always good because you are starting with a team that really knows the technology. Maybe it is in fact intellectual property, some invention that was discovered at the company, and the company doesn't really want to pursue that. It's not in the core of their business, but it still is a valuable asset. It has two parts of the value. One is the human asset value, and the other is the knowledge asset, the intellectual property itself, patents and so on. So again, when you think about what can government or what can the society or what can the ecosystem provide, you have to focus on two things. One is the ultimate goal, right? The ultimate goal is somehow this is going to improve the quality of our society and or industry. And the other is that you have to see it as this synergistic way of providing support that actually ends up being two-way. It is not just, okay, we give money to the startup and so we let it go. No, we give money to the startup or we invest in the company, but we also invest some of our knowledge and our people to help them grow, and in return they may be doing something that can help us and so on. And that's what makes it complicated, and that's what's less mature, less well developed here compared to, for example, Silicon Valley, where I come from. We've been doing that very, very successfully in California for a long time. The corporations are very sophisticated. Many of them were started by entrepreneurs.
Yes.
So, they started in their garages, Steve Jobs and so on, multi-billion-dollar corporations at this point. So they really understand what it takes and what it means. And they're also interested in, encouraging that. And, that cycle, this sort of a self-regenerating ecosystem, if you will, this is not yet here in Hong Kong. It's not, I was very part of this in Taiwan starting again 30-some years ago. It's still not enough. And, when you ask, okay, why isn't it enough? It's a very logical question. But the reason it's not enough is that critical mass of the ecosystem of the different elements. Okay, so we already talked about government and corporates and, for example, legal and finance, but there are other stakeholders in this ecosystem, and they all have to come together. They all have to participate in some of these startups and really participate, as I said, not just through a contribution of funds, but really, they want to learn. Everyone has, in this ecosystem, has to say, we want to learn what does it take to nurture these startups. Whatever the area of technology, it actually doesn't make any difference. AI is the hottest topic these days. Everybody wants to do AI. And AI truly is a revolutionary tool in many ways. It's not the magical answer for everything, but it needs a great deal more. Actually, the state of AI today is that it needs a great deal more of this kind of ecosystem building. And part of the reason why so many people are a little freaked out about AI is they don't really understand what it can do. And I'm talking about even, corporations. Some 75% of corporations have been surveyed. Everyone, is either involved with AI or plans to invest over the next 2-3 years, but they're just not sure where it goes. And the answer for them is, if they would participate in this kind of ecosystem, they would learn a great deal more than by just hiring some, firm, an Accenture, or hiring some, brilliant advisor, consultant, academic. That's not it. You have to live it.
Exactly. So I think you just mentioned AI or government. So I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is that the entrepreneurship, yourself, the individual itself, they have to grow themselves. So one last question is that do you have any recommendation for the next generation, the younger people, that what they can do to get well prepared themselves for we'll mention the new space economy for Hong Kong and for the Greater China? Right.
So that's the one thing that I emphasized in all of the teaching that I did here at HKUST, because I taught entrepreneurship. And the first thing that I told the university administration, my faculty colleagues, and the students is, I don't give exams because I don't want to test on anything that you could memorize. That's no use. So I would call my courses experiential. They had to learn by doing. They actually created entrepreneurial projects. They did all those things. They did a demo day at the end. I mean, it really was, over a semester, a taste, I would call it, of this startup journey. And so it turns out one of the single most difficult things for the students, as well as for the rest of the ecosystem, is you have to have an open mind. You have to be an open mind, not be judgmental about what I should be learning, what is good or better than something else, and of course comparing with other people and so on. You need to be open. You have to say, as you already observed, you have to be eager to learn. So in my language, you have to ask full questions. Yeah. But what's interesting is there's no wrong path to entrepreneurship. At the same time, there's no single right path. So you could come, like I did, say, from music, right? And you say, well, I love music, but I don't want to be just a musician. I want to do something more, but maybe I don't know what it is. Well, maybe you go into something more entrepreneurial. But what is important? Okay, so the first thing is being open. The second is again, not just intellectually, but really having a drive to learn more. And learn more not just from books, but through life experiences. And that means learning how to communicate better with people. Asking questions is part of it, but also listening. You have to have very good listening skills to be a successful entrepreneur. And that's how you learn from other people's experience. It's very important to not be too focused on any particular subject. Now, if you happen to be obsessed with AI technology, for example, that's fine. Or robotics, AI, robotics, these are all part of space tech, very core parts of space tech. Communication technologies, so someone wants to do web something or other. Yeah, that potentially is also part of space tech. Everything can be, you can find some application in space tech. So in a way, space tech is, as I said in the beginning, it's kind of like a lens, a filter through which you see the world, and then you can, like a drop-down menu, you say, okay, if we think about the problems of communicating in space, how is that going to change how we can improve cellular phone technology? And that has definitely improved dramatically over the last decade or so. So anyway, this kind of openness is very important because you don't know what, first of all, you don't know what you don't know, but you also don't know how things are going to evolve.
Yeah.
And it's not important to figure that out. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room and with some kind of a brilliant background or brilliant expertise. None of that is really critical. What you have to really develop is this sense of intuition. Now, intuition, I love to talk about this in the context of AI because a lot of people misunderstand what AI, artificial intelligence, means. But at the moment, the state of the art is, it's really just a technology that looks for patterns among, within a very large data set. A data set that's too large for the human brain to process. So, but I think that this is the way the human mind works as well. Of course, we learn data points, but in getting through life, for example, driving a car, you are actually looking for patterns. You can't actually try to have a very detailed metric measurement of all these distances and all that. Impossible. You would never get anywhere. But so you look for patterns and you try to figure out how you avoid, even walking, forget the car, to walking through an MTR station, right? How do you find your way with all these people rushing in different directions? It's a miracle, isn't it, that we don't have more collisions or problems. But we do that not really unconsciously, we do that at a conscious level, but actually a more intuitive conscious level, because we don't actually think about it, we just kind of know how to navigate. And that turns out to be one of the most critical skills for an entrepreneur. You have to be able to trust your sense of direction, even when you don't have enough data points. So if you're going to obsess over data points, then you're going to be an accountant, right? That's what accountants do. They create the pattern after they have all the data. So it's looking back, it's looking at the past, or at best looking at the present. It can't look at the future. The future can only be seen through direction, and not through the individual data points.
So I believe the main takeaway for today is that first is that you have to ask questions. Yeah, ask questions, think out of the box, and lastly is that you have to trust yourself.
Yeah, and all of those combine to continually re-energize yourself.
Exactly.
And that's even more important, because if you find yourself, for example, and I don't mean to pick on accountants, but there are a lot of people who follow accounting and they're bored, right? And they've worked 5, 10, 20 years. They're bored because they're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. Now, each company is a little bit different and so on and so forth, but it doesn't energize you. If you're doing something that does not energize you, you're not asking the right questions.
Exactly.
One of the questions is, why am I not energized? What can I do that will energize me? And
so another takeaway would be find something that energizes you.
That's it.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Professor Wu. Thank you so much for your time today. Yeah. Thank you for giving us a lot of fruitful insights. So thank you so much for your time.
All right. Thank you again.